Well, thanks for welcoming us here today. Thanks, Ed, and thanks to Cato, and not just for having us here today, but for the long history of leadership. Leadership in what I would describe simply as the field of liberty. And Jenny Beth told you specifically some things that are in the book and the 5 pathways to liberty, but really for us as a movement, for people who participate in the Tea Party movement, the entire movement boils down to a single word. The word is liberty. Liberty is the idea upon which this country is based, and it's unique in human history. It's an aberration, really. It's our obligation to fight for that, because if you look at the entire scope of human history, generally speaking, the pendulum swings between tyranny and really horrible tyranny. And what we see here and what we've experienced in our relatively short history in the world as this great nation is unique. It's worth fighting for. It's a flame. And that flame can go out at any moment. It's our job to fight for it. In the Tea Party movement, a lot of people have gotten engaged with their history in a way that we haven't seen in a long time, in a way that I certainly wasn't taught our history in the public schools. People are reading the words of the Founding Fathers. People are reading the Constitution itself, the Declaration of Independence. And these are words that were written by great men, and men who have, at this point in our history, become almost mythological. And sometimes I think that's a problem for the movement and for the country, because I think sometimes we take them out of context. The greatness of this country at its formation was the fact that these people could be elevated out of their communities, that these communities were strong enough, that they were wise enough to elevate this type of person into government. Think about government today, think about our elected representatives today, and compare them to what we understand the Founding Fathers were and the people who fought in those times, and we see a significant difference. So I think we have to remember that this kind of greatness comes from the communities of America. It's not born in Washington, D.C. It's not born in the state capitals like Sacramento, California. It's born in our communities at home. And when we talk about liberty, I know a lot of times we think about the Founding Fathers, we think about their eloquence and their wisdom and their learning, but really, if you read the real history of the American Revolution, that's not where it started. It started with the regular people. There's an incredible story of a young man named Mellon Chamberlain who was traveling around the country around 1843, and he was trying to collect stories, the oral history of the remaining survivors of the American Revolution. He was afraid those histories would be lost. And he happened to cross Levi Preston in North Carolina. And Preston was a young man in 1775 and turned out on the battlefield at Concord for the fight against the Redcoats. And Chamberlain wanted to know from Preston, why did you go? Why did you go to the field of battle that day to fight the superior British army, the most fearsome fighting force ever assembled in history? What would make you go? Was it the Stamp Act? Is that why you went out to fight? Were you outraged having to place the stamps and pay the taxes to place those stamps on your official documents? And Preston essentially said, I never saw any stamps. I didn't know anything about stamps. We never bought a stamp. He said, well, if it wasn't the stamps, was it the tea? Was it what happened at Boston Harbor? Were you outraged by the imposition of taxes by the British, by the Crown? Is that what drove you to fight on that field of battle that day? And Preston said, we didn't know anything about that. We didn't drink tea out in the country. And so Chamberlain was puzzled. What would inspire you to come out and fight? Why were you so outraged? And he said, son, when we appeared on the field of battle that day and we saw them redcoats, we knew one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. And those redcoats intended that we wouldn't. It's powerful. What they were fighting for, what the average citizen was fighting for, is liberty itself. I realize it's a lofty idea, but it's a simple idea as well, and sometimes we make it too complex. I think Cato is heavily engaged, and always has been, in the fight for that fundamental liberty. And that's what the Tea Party is really all about. We've always governed ourselves as a people, but if we look at what's going on in this city or in our state capitals, we realize that we vote, that we expect certain performance from our elected officials, and then they don't do what we expect of them. That's not limited to the right or the left. It's across the spectrum. The most recent polling shows us that roughly 80% of the American public feels that the federal government no longer has the consent of the governed. The pollster Pat Cadell has described that as a pre-revolutionary moment. I think that's accurate. I think it's dangerous, and I think it's a fundamental problem that crosses political boundaries. And I think what you see in the Tea Party movement, what you see reflected in this book, and the reason that Jenny Beth and I are fighting is because liberty is at stake in this country. We're at the precipice. Both parties are more than willing to take away our liberty. And the book is a call for everybody, every citizen, every individual to stand up in the fight for self-governance. That's why we're here. We appreciate you guys are here today. Thank you very much for the time.